We are reading this morning Parashat Pinchas, and Pinchas actually picks up in the middle of a story. The story begins at the end of last week's Parasha, where Israel becomes seduced by the Moabites, and the Israelite men begin whoring with Moabite women as part of idolatrous worship of Baal Peor. And God's wrath flares, and God is furious. And then this one particular person, one Israelite man, comes and brings a Midianite woman openly, publicly, flagrantly, in violation of everything that God is saying through Moshe, and brings her into his tent to have sex with her. It is a definite sort of in-your-face screw you to Moses. Many of the commentators note that it's a Midianite woman, and imagine this man saying, yeah, you want to forbid all these Moabite and Midianite women to us? Who permitted your wife to you? Because Moses is married to a Midianite. So this is kind of a disaster. God is furious, and Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, Aaron's grandson, takes matters into his own hands. He grabs a spear, he follows them into their tent, and he stabs them in flagrante, right in the middle of the act. No questions, no trial, no jury, just this is vigilante justice, this is zealotry in the name of God, and that's where last week's Parasha ends, right there. And our Parasha picks up with God's response, which I think as we read it, we may find is somewhat troubling. So we'll talk about that after. So I want to now speak into the intersection between the Torah reading and the Haftarah that we're about to read. Picking up where our Parasha begins, as I mentioned, it's the continuation of this very troubling story. This kind of vigilantism and sort of zealotry is really scary and dangerous, right? We know that. It sets a terrible precedent. And we see lots of examples of it in our world, which are devastating, right? Settlers who see every Palestinian as an existential threat. White Christian nationalist circles believing they're acting in God's name when they see evil everywhere. Right? The cheering on the murder of a health insurance executive, storming the Capitol with zip ties and nooses, going back to Yigal Amir and the murder of Rabbi, right? People who think they know because what's happening is wrong and it's terrible for them. We have to stop it. It's very dangerous. We're on the side of right, so violence is justified. The rabbis don't like this either. They really don't like this, right? Technically, they say, the halacha permitted Pinchas to do what he was doing. Technically, he was right. But if he had asked us in advance, we would have told him no. And this is halacha that is technically correct, but we don't teach it. And in the Yerushalmi Talmud, they wanted to excommunicate him. Right? So even though we have here God saying, as we read at the beginning of our parsha, I gave him my briti shalom, my covenant of peace. The rabbis don't like it. Now, there are two problems here. One is, there are, of course, times when a threat is real and quick action must be taken and can save many lives. Right? We've seen examples of that in our society, too. And what do we do with the fact that God seems to reward Pinchas here? God seems to back him up. So the text itself, or at least the way that it was vocalized, that it was given vowels and verses and chapters and parshiot, hints at the discomfort with God seeming to approve of this. There are three examples of brokenness in this parasha. Two I've already mentioned. One is that the story is broken up over 2 weeks. Right? As though when they divided into parshiot, they wanted to separate the reward from the story. We read about God's reward. Maybe we will remember what we read last week and what this is really about, right? The second is that broken verse. And it was after the plague, silence. Right? We don't usually have that. And the third is that in the covenant that God gives to Pinchas here, it's Briti Shalom, and the letter Vav in the word Shalom is written broken in the Torah. There's like a break in the middle of it. All of these are hints that this is not just okay. There is another way of reading this that I want to bring out for us. So, Nachama Leibowitz brings a couple of really valuable commentaries here. She quotes Rabbi Baruch Epstein, who's the author of Torah Tamima, as saying, a deed like this kind of zealotry, must be animated by a genuine, unadulterated spirit of zeal to advance the glory of God. And in the case, who can tell whether the perpetrator is not really prompted by some selfish motive, maintaining that one is doing it for the sake of God when it's actually murder, right? It's not really about God. I'm uncomfortable with these people, right? All the people who believe they absolutely know who God hates, and shockingly, it corresponds exactly to the people they hate. Like, isn't that amazing, right? It's really about their own stuff. And that was why the sages wanted to excommunicate Pinchas had not the Holy Spirit testified that his zeal for God was genuine. We need our Parashat to say, no, this was the real deal. We are right to question whether Pinchas did the right thing. The rabbis were right to do it, and we need a deus ex machina. We need God stepping in and saying, no, Pinchas was okay. He really meant it, like he was pure of spirit, right? And Rav Kook makes a similar point. We have a blessing in the weekday Amidah that is called Birkat HaMinim, the blessing against the heretics. It's very harsh. Right? It's like, may God bring all this terrible punishment upon all the people who hate God, et cetera, et cetera. And our tradition says that that blessing was added into the Amidah by Shmuel HaKatan. Who is Shmuel HaKatan? He was known for his love of his fellow creatures. That was his overriding characteristic. And so Rav Kook says, any sage distinguished for his piety and learning is capable of formulating prayers breathing sentiments of mercy and love. Any good person can write beautiful prayers of love. But a prayer like this one, so full of condemnation and hate, is bound to arouse the private feelings of animosity and spite on the part of the author against the enemies and persecutors of his people. Such a prayer must therefore originate with one noted for the holiness and purity of character, an entire lack of passion or of hatred. Such a person was Shmuel HaKatan. And one could be sure that he was motivated by completely unselfish considerations, et cetera, all right? So that's one way of understanding what the text is doing here. It's testifying on behalf of Pinchas that he alone is capable of doing this, and we shouldn't model ourselves after him. Because who among us can be sure we're so pure, right? So it's not a model to emulate. But here's a different read, and this is also Nachama Leibowitz brings. This is by the Naftali Tzvi of Berlin, who's known as the Netziv, in his work Ha'amek Davar. And what he says is the following. In reward for turning away the wrath of the Holy Blessed One, God blessed Pinchas with the attribute of peace, that he should not be quick-tempered or angry. Since it was only natural that such a deed as Pinchas's should leave in his heart an intense emotional unrest afterward. The divine blessing was designed to cope with this and promised peace and tranquility of soul. This is extremely profound. Essentially, what the Netziv is saying is he's reading God's response not as a reward, but as a healing of the trauma of Pinchas having stepped up to do this and the potentially negative impact it would have on him. The danger that the fear and the anger and the reactivity and the adrenaline rush, when one steps up like that to save one's people, will settle in his heart and soul and take hold and become a kind of addiction, hardening into hate and demonization and rage. And God promises him, I will set your heart at ease. I will calm your central nervous system. I will make sure that you don't remain in this reactive state, addicted to adrenaline and cortisol from having to do this. The danger is that the kernel of genuine action to protect what one loves will become distorted and expand into a lens through which one sees the entire world. Note, when I read last week's Parashat to you, the original story, the perpetrators were anonymous. A certain man took a certain Midianite woman. They are only named now, after the fact, as a reminder that they are human. Now they have names, right? I give Pinchas credit, as I said last night, for his communitarian understanding of the world. He understands that the private actions of two people are never just private actions of two people, that they are affecting the whole society, that they are undermining societal norms. He gets that. I give him credit for that. But once we start taking matters into our own hands, and certainly once we start killing people, seeing them as existential threats, it is easy to forget that they are human, just like us. They have names. Briti Shalom, God gives to Pinchas. The Netziv is reading this as a promise to him, as a covenant, that that will not happen, that he won't become seduced by that. And I want to say that this message, read that way, is really essential as we mark this period of 3 weeks that began on Thursday, on the 17th of Tammuz, and as we celebrate July 4th and the 250th anniversary of America today. The 3 weeks are a period of national lament and introspection and repentance, teshuvah. On the 17th of Tammuz, which begins that period, we remember the first breaches in the temple in Jerusalem. Those are the beginnings of the external destruction. We also mark the day that Moses smashed the tablets. That was the 17th of Tammuz, when our core values and principles were violated and crumbled. And we're supposed to sit in the relationship between those two things. How an experience of threat can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And in fear, we turn away from who we are. Here in America, and I am informed in this reading not only by the Netziv, but an article that Joy sent me by Shul Magid. Here in America, the Jewish community has become obsessed with anti-Semitism, almost like a drug. It is different in some ways from the way white Christian nationalists see evil everywhere. But in its function and its impact, it is not entirely different. It is unifying and energizing and addictive. And it's a distraction and an excuse to avoid looking at all kinds of other things. There is, for sure, a lot wrong with America right now. There always has been. Of course, there is a lot of anti-Semitism in America right now, along with racism and Islamophobia and misogyny and xenophobia and transphobia and homophobia and every kind of hate there is. It is all on the rise, but it has always been here. It's distressing, it's disgusting, it's scary, and of course it is dangerous. And also, it is not lurking at every corner and in every heart, waiting to pounce. And it does not serve us well to act like it is. America is still also the place where every time something happens that threatens Jews anywhere in the world, I get emails from the local police chiefs assuring us of their protection and care and concern. America is also the place where my good friend, who's a doctor in town who is Islamic, says to me, you know, I feel like right now it's the Jews who need a hug, not the Palestinians, because there's so much anger. America is also the place where the son of a woman who was born in a concentration camp, who happens to be a friend of mine, her son just won the Democratic Colorado governor primary by a huge margin. America is also the place where neighbors in Minnesota stick together against hate. That's America too. I give you Briti Shalom, my covenant of peace. Yes, there is a role for Jewish leaders and rabbis in naming and responding to anti-Semitism. But churning fear and anger is irresponsible and it is dangerous. It isolates us, it keeps us reactive, it divides and divides and divides and divides us from other people and us from each other. And we start demonizing the other Jews and calling them Nazi capos. How did we get here? I have compassion for those rabbis who have spoken out very strongly about threats, right? We all grew up with that, never again, never again, never again. And no one wants to miss the moment and be silent when we should speak. I get it. And I worry that too many so-called leaders are not doing the inner work necessary to be sure that this zealousness is coming from a pure place. And I believe they're causing harm. Our culture wars, or I say our culture, centers around the kind of social media reactionary meme. You see this periodically. If you're not either terrified or outraged, choose your problem, by X, whatever it is, you're not paying attention. Right? I hate that. It's a terrible way to live, and it is counterproductive. Here's what's more true. If you're only terrified or outraged by X, you're not paying attention. Because it's not that X, whatever it is, isn't real. It's just that it's always part of a larger story. There's always more going on. There are always other people who need our care and concern. With the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States, all true, and still all true, we are not the most vulnerable population here. We are not. There are other people who need our care and concern. We cannot, it's not right to be entirely self-focused. Not that we shouldn't protect ourselves. There are other things we have to think about too, right? And We have to think about, in addition to worrying about our safety in Israel, we do have to be focused on what is happening to Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. And we can't use our own fear as an excuse to look away, right? How many times when we raise something is the answer, well, they hate us, well, anti-Semitism, well, right? It's not okay. And it's not only that X isn't real, but it's part of a larger story, because the larger story also includes all kinds of amazing, beautiful, wonderful things happening in the world. And we will function better as human beings. We will be kinder, we will be more loving, we will do more good things, we will make a bigger, better difference in the world when we balance our worldview with all the beauty and holiness and kindness around us, and not just the hate. And that takes us to the Haftarah, which we're about to turn to. This is the first of 3 Haftarot of rebuke, leading to Eicha on Tisha B'Av. There are some things we will read in the subsequent Haftarot of these 3 weeks and in Eicha that are awfully hard to hear. Realities that must be faced head on and worked on. And they will focus our attention on things in Israel and America that are hard to hear and hard to look at, and we need to focus and work on. But if you look at the first words that the prophet Jeremiah, this is the call to Jeremiah, you'll see it on page 971, the call to Jeremiah, the first words that God tells him to speak to the people Israel, they are as follows. I accounted to your favor the devotion of your youth, the chesed, the loving kindness of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness, in a land not sown. Israel was holy to Adonai, the first fruits of God's harvest, and all who ate, all who attacked Israel, were held guilty. Right? What is God saying? I remember the kindness of your youth. Jeremiah, in the Haftarah earlier, resists the call to prophesy. He says, I can't speak, I'm only a youth. It's the same verb, same word, a na'ar. And God says, don't say I'm only a youth. I remember the kindness of your youth. It wasn't foolish, childish naivete. When we were young, when America was born, when Israel was founded, when we were in love with both countries, it wasn't a pipe dream that reality was bound to crush. It was a vision of what's possible, of what's worth aiming for and working toward. It was chesed. It was ahava. And that youthful, hopeful, faithful voice is what I need right now, God says. That's the voice of change and healing. That's the voice that will call people to account in a productive way. The voices that love this country, that love Israel, in all of both countries' messiness and imperfection and disappointment and, yes, actual evil and goodness and kindness and hopefulness and, at times, holiness. This Haftarah is saying that we cannot afford to be cynical and world-weary and filled with anger and fear. We have to remember the kindness, the chesed of our youth.